welcome to Quackalope. Thank you for being here. Today, I'm going to be teaching you how to play SolForge Fusion, a brand new game from the creators of Magic the Gathering and Ascension Tactics. Now, some important things you need to understand before we dive into exactly how to play this game. First off, I am working with a prototype. The game is currently available over on Kickstarter, link as always in the top of the video description, so swing over there and check out everything they're offering. This is a small box comparison to the something like 15,000 potential cards in the base game alone. SolForge Fusion is going to be a deck-mashing lane combat card game. Now, I know I just said a lot of words, and trust me, we'll dive into this, but there are a few high-level principles you need to understand about the game. First off, every single deck you receive is going to be, well, entirely unique, composed of a variety of different possible characters, factions, and, of course, Forgeborn, who are going to be your special sort of deities, or minions that are going to be coming out from the frozen earth and commanding their troops across the battlefield. On the back of each Forgeborn is going to be the unique set of cards that they come with, and every deck is going to be able to merge or combine with every other deck in the game. Meaning that as you play, you'll be doing this process of discovering new combinations and abilities, taking two variable asymmetric decks, merging them together, and then going to war here in the battlefield. Now, when I talk about a lane combat game, you might think of something along the lines of a MOBA. This is going to simplify and replicate some of those elements. You'll be battling down 5 different lanes, moving troops towards your opponent's keep, and doing your very best to take out enemies, but predominantly take down the health of your enemy's Forgeborn. So, let's go ahead and talk through everything we have in front of us, and then get started with the how to play. First off, in each one of these demo boxes, I received a total of 4 completely unique decks. I have a whole nother set here that I actually haven't opened up yet. We also have our stack of minion cards, which are going to be the cards that certain spells and abilities summon onto the board state. These are going to be available to both players. Next, we're going to have our playmat here in front of us. This is going to have locations for everything to be placed. First off, your 2 levels of upgraded cards, level 2 and level 3, your main player deck, your discard pile where your upgrades start cycling into for you to continue redrawing up, your banish pile, which is where any defeated creatures go, your forge card, which is going to indicate whether or not you're currently the active or passive player, the 5 lanes, and the Forgeborn location, where you play your troop commander and have them guiding kind of the outposts. Finally, I have a few different sets of dice here. These are going to be used to measure not only health, but also I'm going to use them to measure stat buffs and upgrades, with your power level and your health level represented by each color. Outside of that, we can start setting up this game. So when you first sit down to play SolForge, you're going to have an important decision to make. What decks and abilities and factions do you want to combine together? Each deck is going to consist of a Forge card, which flips back and forth, showing active or passive. It's going to have your Forgeborn, and it's going to have a indicated set of 3 different types of cards, each one having the same character across the board. So you can see here, we have a level 1, 2, and 3 for Vikrit's Embrace. These cards are going to be what you start upgrading and progressing throughout the course of the game. So your starting deck will only be composed of the level 1 cards. As you play cards into the battlefield, you'll start upgrading and progressing your deck. So when you start setting up, you're going to choose 2 of your factions. You're going to separate your cards into the appropriate starting piles. Again, level 1, 2, and 3. You're going to place both of your Forgeborn out in front, and you only need 1 of these Forge cards. So you can go ahead and place that up in your top corner. You'll randomly decide who's the starting player a little bit later. To start with, you're going to take your level 1, and you're going to mix these together, taking all of your factions and slowly shuffling them into place. This will go into your deck pile. Your level 2 and level 3 are also going to combine, but you don't need to shuffle them. You see, these are going to be drawn up and upgraded as you continue playing through the game. You'll place these over here in the designated slots, level 2 and level 3. Finally, you'll look at the special abilities that each of your Forgeborn have and decide which one you actually want to play with. In this case, I'm going to choose Ironbeard, and I'm going to go ahead and play Cersei off to the side. We won't be using her special powers during this scenario, but if I was playing again, I could mix other variable decks, or I could play the same set of decks and instead choose her special powers and abilities to utilize if Ironbeard doesn't quite give me what I'm looking for. Your opponent will do the same, constructing the same setup and actually sitting across from you. This is a 2 to 4 player game, but the typical scenario, which is the one I'll be teaching, is going to engage with 2 players with 2 separate mats fighting down 5 lanes across from each other. At this point, you should have a starting deck of 20 level 1 cards. You'll go ahead and draw 5 of those to indicate your starting hand, and you're ready to begin play. The last thing to do is to decide who is going to start as the active or inactive player, randomly determining who is going to have the Forge enabled. I'm going to go ahead and start with the Forge enabled as we begin play, but I'll do my best to reference what happens if you're the passive player on your turn. You'll also want to make sure that your health is set to 50. I'll go ahead and use 2 dice to represent that here. The ultimate object of the game is to bring your opponent's health down to 0 by doing damage across these lanes, or by the end of 4 full cycles to have dealt the most damage across the game. Before we get into the sequence of play, let's go ahead and look at the types of cards you'll have in your hand that you just drew up. First, you're going to have creatures. These are going to be the beasts that sometimes have special abilities, but oftentimes work as a line of defense or a powerful attack moving across these 5 lanes. You're also going to have spells or ability cards. These are cards that trigger the moment you play them down into your lane. And so these will be more active mid-game effects, whereas these are going to hopefully be the force that you're collecting out in front of you. Now, because every deck is going to be different, we're not going to read through all of the cards and abilities I have on hand here, because the odds are you'll have a whole different collection in front of you. Just know that the text of every card will determine what that card is able to do, and there will be a helpful reference guide or sheet showing all the iconography available in the game. So if you have any questions, please make sure you reference your user manual. Now, on your turn, the actions that you can take are play 1 card from your hand into a lane, either a spell or a creature. If you don't want to play a card, or you cannot play a card, you could alternatively choose to banish a card in order to go through an upgrade cycle, which we'll dig into in just a moment. You could also go ahead and activate any spells or abilities that you have on the game board. If you've already done everything you'd like to do, you'll pass, giving the other player priority. Across the course of a turn, you'll get 2 full activation phases or priority phases, meaning on your turn you'll be able to play up to 2 cards from your hand. Once both players have passed priority twice, you'll go ahead and proceed to the combat phase. Now, before we get to the combat phase, let's go ahead and talk about how you actually play cards into the timeline here. Now, first, if you have the Forge card flipped, you'll be playing into this top row. If you have the Forge card on its grayed outside, you'll be playing into the bottom secondary row, creating a bit of a delay for the player who is currently not active, meaning these cards could be used as active abilities or defenses, but they're not going to attack at the top of their sequence. Any creatures that are played down will go into their respective row. These are lanes that are self-contained, and unless you have an ability allowing you to switch positions, these cards will stay exactly where they're positioned. Any spells that you play will go out of the game immediately, hopping over here into the banish pile. Now, the interesting thing about this game is as you play cards, you're also making a decision of what and how you're going to level up. For instance, if I went ahead and played the Apocalypser down here onto the tableau, I'd dig into my deck of level 2 cards, finding the similar artwork and the similar name, and going ahead and leveling up my Apocalypser to level 2. Once this card is defeated, the level 1 will leave the game entirely, but the level 2, strategically, will be placed into my next discard pile. So after I've played through this hand of cards, all of these will be shuffled back together, and I will have a whole new set of more powerful, more experienced units. That's going to be true for every card you play, including your spells and your creatures. Once players, like I said, have passed 2 times, you're going to move on to the combat phase. The combat phase is going to happen lane by lane, resolving attack and damage versus each other. Now, I'll go ahead and place out an example card here as if I had an opponent across from me. When I attack up a lane, if I have no one defending or no one blocking that attack, I'll do straight damage to my opponent. In this case, my Apocamancer would be able to do a total of 4 total damage to my opponent. Now, if I'd utilized their ability earlier, they would have been tapped, meaning they're not going to activate on this turn. Now, if I'd happened to use any creature abilities on my turn, they would be tilted sideways. Before combat phase starts, I'll go ahead and write them up so that they can engage in a full attack. Now, once again, with no one opposing me, I deal damage straight to my opponent. If I have someone opposing me, I'll deal damage across. So here, the Arrogant Judicar is going to deal damage across to his opponent, dealing a total of 10, and the same thing here across to me, meaning both cards, in this case, would be removed. If, for example, I had a Stout Warcharger fighting the Apocamancer here, they'd actually do damage just across from each other, and damage doesn't go away from round to round. So I'd deal 5 damage here, leaving my Apocamancer with only 1 health remaining, and I'd deal 4 damage across the Stout Warcharger, leaving him with 7. That damage will remain from turn to turn until you finally wipe out your creatures. When creatures die, they'll hop over into the banish pile, and you won't play with them again for the rest of the game. Now, any creature abilities that deal with wiping out or dealing damage to your opponent can be activated at any time, including the moment they enter play. After the combat phase has resolved, you'll go ahead and flip over your card if you are the active player, turning it to the passive Forge side, and if you are the passive Forge player, turning it back to the active. From there, you'll discard the rest of your hand into your discard pile, draw up another 5 cards, and continue progressing with the game. Now, one important thing to note as you're moving into this second phase, any creatures that you play as the passive side will actually go down here into the bottom row. That's important during the combat phase, because while they can act as a line of defense, these creatures won't actively attack. Instead, they'll shift up at the end of your turn. The player who's not the active Forge player will have a slight delay between when their creatures act and engage in combat. So, the game will proceed like that, each player taking a series of actions on the board, typically playing or engaging with 2 cards, upgrading their card decks, and then after the combat phase, drawing back up their hand. At any point, when you finish drawing the very last of your cards from your deck, you're going to have an update moment. This means, even on the 4th round of the game, when I draw 5 cards from my deck into my hand, if there's nothing left here in the deck pile, I will reshuffle everything. So, if you had 20 cards when you first started the game, your 4th turn, or your 4th phase of the game, will be when you reshuffle all of your upgrades back together, and redraw that original 5 hand, giving you the opportunity to go ahead and draw some of your upgraded or leveled up characters. So the game will proceed in that manner, each player taking an active role, playing cards into the battlefield and slowly upgrading their decks. At the end of every combat phase, you'll continue to discard your hand and redraw 5 new cards, until you come to an end of a cycle. The end of the cycle is denoted when there's no more cards remaining in your deck at the end of drawing up. The game is going to consist of 4 total cycles, these end zones where we upgrade our decks and continue with the course of play. And you'll be unlocking your Forgeborn's power as you play through these cycles, starting with the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th cycle. Each one of your Forgeborn are going to have their own set of special abilities, and you'll be able to activate them as the game goes on. For instance, Knockback, Intimidate, and Demoralize here with Ironbeard. Now, just like your creature abilities, you can take the active ability of your Forgeborn at any point. You'll just denote it by tipping it to the side or cycling it down your game mat and taking whatever that ability is. Your Forgeborn will be ready to refresh just like your creatures at the end of every turn, and you'll be slowly gaining more power as the game goes on. Like I said, at the end of each cycle, which is when you reshuffle your deck and your discard pile, your Forgeborn will move from level 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. At the end of the 4th cycle, the game's coming to an end no matter what. This does mean that both players could still have health remaining. If at any point you've reduced your opponent's health to 0, you've won the game. But if you get to the very end, you'll come to a scenario where you have to check who's dealt the most damage. If you have more health than your opponent, you'll be the victor. But what happens if you're still tied? If you're tied, you'll move into a phase called sudden death, meaning the victor will be the player who strikes the next blow and has more health at the end of the next turn. So that's SolForge Fusion. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section down below. And like I said, I am working with a prototype, so there is a chance that some things have been changed between now and when you get your copy. Make sure you reference the gamebook, check the iconography, and double check the wording on all your cards to make sure you're playing correctly. Whatever the case, whatever you do, remember to do the important thing: get out and play some games. We'll see you next time. Thank you.